you to all our panelists. You did an amazing, excellent job. I'm very pleased and proud of you for sticking right to timeline so well. So now I invite you to submit questions. We have people walking around. If you would like to give your questions to them or need a note card, we'll be happy to take those. But before we go to those, I just wanted to pose a quick question to the panelists that you might get started thinking about and talking about. We've heard obviously a lot about all of the opportunities and the exciting space of technology and government and open data and all of that. Are there things that concern you or trouble you about this movement? Those could be either technical challenges. We have students and others here who are actually software developers. What are the things that keep you up at night as far as a technical problem goes? Or more broadly, do you see any downsides in the work that you do or in the work that that the open data movement is bringing more generally? Anyone like to respond?
I'll start with the concern that I think all of us in the open data movement share. Jean alluded to it earlier in her talk. I think we've got a long way to go, Camille, in terms of creating a sustainable ecosystem for developers. I think Eddie with Open Oakland can attest to that. There are great organizations, one that hasn't been mentioned today, which is Code for America. It's like the Peace Corps for data geeks. It's a fantastic national organization. They're doing great things in the cities they engage with, but there's no business model for aspiring developers who are beyond the weekend project. Okay, I've gone to a couple of hackathons. I've created a really cool app. People love it. The city wants to actually use it, but it can't be supported. It can't be procured. I have no way of maintaining this app. How do I take it from one city to another? So the whole question of standards becomes important. And those are all part of the evolution of open data that I know all of us are working on with the communities. But those are challenges that we must meet in order to give this its full potential.
Anyone else?
From my standpoint, I think that kind of dovetailing off of how you ended that is that we need to have the ability for software developers to build software and repeat it throughout a whole life cycle. So not just build it for one jurisdiction and make it like a custom app. I mean, because anytime you do custom development, it becomes very one-off and very expensive to maintain. So what we've done with our platform is provide SDKs and open development tools so that developers can build applications one time and then it will work throughout all our customer base. I mean, it was one of the big selling points that I've made to Civic Insight is they build their application against our database, then that we can help them repeat that throughout our customers. And that way, it becomes exciting for investors who want to invest in these software companies to they can provide a business model that says, hey, listen, we can grow because Excella has standard SDKs and they have an ecosystem that allows us to invest in. Just like if you look at, there's numerous companies who've built on top of the Salesforce platform that are just as successful and just as big almost as Salesforce is today because they had standard tools and an audience that they could build to.
Quick comments to that. I think that data literacy is one issue. There's going to be a lot of open data out there. How people can interpret and then how people can use the data is one thing that is important to take into account. Another challenge I see is it's not only about just starting to open data, it's all the communication that goes around opening data, the engagement, and really being able to make those movements really get to somewhere. Sustainability of applications, I completely agree. And then there's another one I want to finish up with, which is data quality and data standards. As we interact with a lot of different cities, and if they want to open up, for example, permits data or budget data or other data, they're coming to us and they're asking, how should we open that data? And it would be great that at some point, not only quality of data as ODI is doing now, which I think makes a lot of sense, but also how do we structure the data that we get out so that any developer can grab all this data always in the same way so that they can really make this application that was created for Boston to work out all over the place.
Great, thank you. I want to pick up on the second point you made about community engagement. There was a question about where do you see, two things actually. One is, how do you measure the quality of community engagement? You obviously have lots of quantitative metrics, but how does that translate into real meaningful engagement? So why don't we attack that question, and then I have a follow-up one. If there's anyone who wants to
the way our
speak.
customers look at it is it's on the percentage of permits and licenses that they issue online or through mobile devices. So it's all about dollars and cents. So if they do 100 million in permit activity, what they want to do is move as many of those transactions from behind the counter out into the online world, whether that's through a mobile application, whether that's through a website, their web portal. They want to move that traffic out of City Hall and move it into a business owner's home, their office, or wherever they are. I think one of the things that we see in the construction area is that contractors don't work behind desks. They actually work from job to job site. So what we need to do is arm them with mobile technology that allows them to transact with building, planning, code departments that allows them to basically do their work and do those transactions right from the job site so they can become very efficient.
I think there's different ways to look at engagement. That's a great example. In open data, it's opening up this data and information and putting it in the hands of people who haven't really had interactions. Tom talked about, you show up to a city meeting and speak for 3 minutes. And one way to measure engagement is to see how this data is actually being used and distributed. So if a city publishes crime data, that's fantastic. If it does it in real time, it's even better. If people start working with that data and contextualizing it, saying, oh, well, what's crime like in my neighborhood, and create a map of that and share it with others so that people who are on Google searching for crime in such and such neighborhood now find this derivative work that was created on top of an open data set, and that gets distributed. Maybe somebody sees something in that data and blogs about it and embeds that map on their blog to tell a story, and that gets picked up by others. That's how we measure engagement, because now that data is leaving the silo of a government database and getting in the hands of people in the context that makes it most useful. And I think for us, that's kind of the basic thread of measuring engagement.
Yeah. I think there's I think it's really hard to measure. I mean, I think that's why this is the great unknown in terms of engagement online. Are we trying to go to representative democracy where we're going to make all the decisions like we do with the jury, and it's like the citizen's right to make the decision? I don't think that we're going that way. I don't think that's necessarily appropriate. But there are some people that are pushing for that model. Is getting 2,000 people involved in a conversation in your community a win or not? And so I talked to a number of our customers. One of our best portals is Speak Up Austin. City of Austin has built a portal through our technology to go out and get ideas and feedback on projects, and they have about 2,000 people in the community that are registered and active users. And the city has 500,000 people. So is that a success to have that type of audience, or is that not a success? The White House, I think they bumped it up to, is it 100,000 people now, and they're crowdsourcing. 100,000 is still a small percentage, but how much bigger is that than the amount of feedback we had before? I mean, Austin might have had 100 people before that were actively engaged, and now they have 2,000. And is that more representative? Does it lead to better decisions? So I think how we measure it is still up in the air, and it's going to take a while to work those models out. And the hard part about this whole process is the people change. There's a lot of fear. I always tell my customers it's like divorce counseling. Government and citizens not gelling. We're not getting together right now. There's no trust between either side. The government's tired of the crazy people who come to their meetings and the interactions that they get. And the citizens are frustrated from the results and the spending that they see. So I don't know if anybody's been through divorce counseling. I have yet to get married, so I haven't done that yet. But it's a long, painful process, and I think that's what we're in for in this community engagement. And the data will drive it, and the technology is easy to solve. It's like we're here in Silicon Valley or in the Bay Area, and it's like termites to just old dead wood. I mean, we're just going to eat up these technical problems and the standards and the information online if the people can get out of the way and the fear and the lack of trust can get out of the way. And I think that's our number one problem in achieving the results.
Something that I think I've seen, first of all, I think it's hard to come up with metrics that would work across different types of engagements. I think you would have to understand what it is that you want to achieve, and then see whether or not you achieve those goals. When it comes to some of the things that happened in New Orleans, I remember one of the biggest data nerds that I met was a retired grandmother who was always at City Hall, knew exactly what they were doing, and was always checking in on what was going on in the city. The way that something that we heard and really inspired was that she now goes to City Hall with the data that we have provided, and she is able to make her case. And because people in City Hall also know about this program, they can check this themselves as well, and they can see whether things line up. And I think that there's a way in which engagements can only be measured by being in the room and seeing what the exchange is like, what the energy is, how positive the interactions are. I think that is the way in which I feel like I have seen both in New Orleans and in Oakland that when people are able to work together and use data as the foundation for which they make decisions and how they approach problems, that's what I would consider success.
That's great. There are a number of stakeholders in this whole ecosystem that you have spoken about. There are government agencies, there are citizens themselves, there are the companies, construction companies or others that are interested in using this open data. In what sector do you see the greatest drive for innovation? Do you feel like it's being pushed, and this probably differs from city to city or context to context, but do you see a place where innovation is really being pushed forward by a particular sector within this whole space?
I don't really see any innovation myself. I think it's pretty weak if you look across, what you would see in the private sector. I think it's there's very little investments that are being made in civic startups. I mean, it's fractional compared to what you would see in the public sector and in the private sector, and that's because what I'm seeing is that a lot of these open data movements. I mean, I agree with everybody; it all feels good, but at the same time, it all comes down to economics. You have to be able to build a business around a software company, and when you sit in front of a city council. I mean, I've sit in front of hundreds of city council meetings to sell them enterprise solutions that cost millions of dollars. And you have to show them the ROI on that. You have to prove to them that, hey, this system, while it may cost $10 million, it's going to make you $100 million. It's not that much different than what you would sell to a Fortune 500 company. You have to have that same mindset. So you have to show them how you're going to increase the velocity of the capital that they bring in, the dollars that they bring in. Or you're going to have to show how people, when they buy $1 million piece of land in San Francisco, instead of having it sit there for 4 years while people figure out how to develop it through the system that you're selling them, through the openness of it, they're going to be able to build on it in a year and save themselves millions and millions of dollars in interest payments that have to pay back to the bank. So to me, it's about economics, and we have to provide a platform for people to be able to invest in.
Amazing panel. I mean, hearing this question and these answers, it's fantastic conversations. I agree with what Maury said that it has to be an ROI there, and it's not yet the time to say, oh wow, these are the 2 or 3 sectors where the ROI is clearly proven. But I think that, and someone mentioned that in one of the presentations, there are big challenges out there. Healthcare is a big challenge that needs to be solved not only here in the US but in other places. Education, I've seen Dominican Republic doing a complete hackathon around problems that they have around education. So being able to get some of these problems, key themes that need to be solved, that cannot be yet solved by government itself, and then allowing for other people to be able to collaborate on that. I've seen a lot of innovation around these problems, but I completely agree with Maury. There's not yet a clear, sustainable model for that innovation. But innovation is happening around these key problems that need to be solved.
Camille, I have a slightly different perspective. First of all, innovation is happening. It's happening, just go check out the National Civic Day of Hacking and check out the legacy that was left from that day. You're probably familiar with hackathons and developer events and, things that Eddie and Spike are doing in Oakland and, literally hundreds of groups like them around the country. And they're building apps, and some of those apps are now starting to use data from Excella, and they're finding an ecosystem where they can become sustainable. So that's happening. At the federal level, think of iTriage saving lives. Think of O-Power helping people make better decisions in order to save energy. Think of BillGuard, these services that are helping consumers make better financial decisions for their credit card. All these companies just did not exist before open data became mainstream and usable and API enabled and all those things. So it's starting to happen. And in terms of ROI, when it comes to government, it is both economics and saving money, but it's also outcomes. I mean, these organizations exist to deliver outcomes. And if we can help them deliver better outcomes with something that helps them understand why these properties are blighted in New Orleans and how to really move those off the market and get people in homes, what more ROI do we need? Civic developers did that on their own and helped the city solve that problem. Yes, maybe there's an altruistic element to it, and that's great, but it produced real results. So ROI comes in many, many different flavors, and I think there's a lot more to be done for sure, but it's happening.
I think that there are a few things going on. One of them is that there are infrastructure questions that are slightly different than maybe the innovation questions that maybe are built on. So, for example, we do pull in information from Acela, and they have a system that does allow us to more easily move to different cities and work with different cities, and that is a great tool that we have. It's a good foundation. So I consider that infrastructure. But then there are tools and services that are built on top of that, which I'm not sure that space is completely hashed out yet. For example, the Knight Foundation, for example, funds a lot of ideas that are just budding. They just need that extra boost or that small chance to experiment. And I do think that there is a lot of experimentation and there's a lot of in this innovation space, but I don't know if I don't think it has skyrocketed the way that people have expected. So we're in this weird space right now where it looks like there's a lot of potential in this maybe innovation space. It feels like it, and there's some examples of this happening, but I don't think it has taken off in the way that a lot of people have expected it to.
Yeah, there's a real ecosystem that's changing, and Maury and I have been in this business for a long time, as long with some of the other panelists here. So, it's been slow, but I think it is really starting to grow. And there's, Code for America is a great example. We've been mentioned a bunch of times. But as a company, it's like we're partnering and competing against all sorts of different business models now. Whether it's a developer who built something, or it's the government who's building something, or it's Code for America who's got the nonprofit, and this ecosystem of some competition and new ideas and funding from Knight Foundation and Google and other areas really driving a lot of civic startups. And I'd say in the last 2 years, we're starting to see the ecosystem really build to something that is going to be more explosive growth than we've seen over the last decade. We started in '99, and I can't tell you how many times we went in front of a government agency and said, "Hey, we believe in transparency, and we could put the video of your meetings on live and searchable and indexed on demand. And they were like, why would we ever want to do that? Why would we ever want to do that? And we had to go find those thought leaders in government that would actually do it. And then to Maury's point, we had to build a sustainable business off of it. And all those pieces have to be there. We need thought leaders in innovation and risk takers in government. And we need sustainable business models. And I would challenge everybody that's in open data to think about how you're going to get that data. I think Maury and I, Excella and Granicus, both built our businesses off of being able to say, we're going to automate a process that you're doing manually really inefficiently through technology. We're going to allow you to save time and money there. And then we're going to layer transparency of that data right into the process. So we don't have to go scrape data and create the transparency afterwards. Let's automate processes, create transparency, and then build collaboration on top of that. And so you have 3 layers, and government will buy into the ROI and the political win of transparency and collaboration if we do them together. And I think as the ecosystem comes together, you're going to see more and more of that in a real growth plan for this business.
I would chime in here on a lot of these great thoughts. I mean, Tom and Maury and Saf, these are pioneers in this space, and what they've been doing is going into big institutions. These institutions are the equivalent of Fortune 500 companies when you measure them according to their revenues. Many counties and states would easily rank highly in the Fortune 500. What does that mean? It means you're trying to turn a culture and you're trying to turn processes around that are long in the making, and for a big institution that's very difficult. Government technology is notoriously behind. I think they could tell you lots of war stories. Anyone on this panel could. It's often not just a decade behind, as is conventional wisdom. It's often 20, sometimes 30 years behind. If you look at the enterprise systems that are at use in this space, they're running on code that was written probably 30 years ago, sometimes 40 years ago. The big enterprise systems or accounting systems that we bump into were originally written for the corporate supply chain in terms of manufacturing. Then they moved into kind of different enterprise modules and were glommed on from the private space into the public space. So I think it's important to keep that perspective in mind when we're evaluating how fast innovation is taking place. We're turning oil tankers here. Moreover, the traditional business models in this space, I would push back a little bit. There have been extremely successful companies operating in the government space. They're so big and so broken in many respects that we don't consider them closely. We're talking about the SAPs and the Oracles that make a tremendous amount of money selling services primarily, platforms, and then tons of consulting on top of it. That's a business model that actually is quite sustainable. People have made tons and tons of money in that space, but it's not good for innovation. It's often not good for the customers. If you poll the customers that are doing these big enterprise deployments, you'll find that a majority of them are unhappy with their enterprise systems. A non-trivial percentage of those deployments result in litigation. Imagine that. Imagine your customers suing you kind of on a regular basis for all the things that have gone wrong with the deployment. So the innovation, the technology in the space is broken, and the business models that people are trying to build here and across the country are trying to remake this industry kind of broadly. I would totally agree that visionaries are critical, whether it's the small town in the Eastern Sierras or the middle of the country, and whether it's at the top, it's that mayor or manager or finance director, or whether it's at the bottom, whether it's civic innovators who are going and saying, listen, we need to change the way things work. These are important people, not just for the message they're spreading, but for the ability for it to disseminate, whether it's at the dinner table or at the town hall. And finally, I actually think that while it is slow and it feels slow, there's a lot more investment taking place in the GovTech space. Our chairman, for instance, of our company has co-founded a multi-billion-dollar company in this space. And the company's been around just about 10 years now. It's in the intelligence and space, particularly in government. And the idea of doing that, a bunch of kids from Stanford doing that and breaking into the space is almost unthinkable. And so would have been unthinkable 10 or 15 years ago. I don't think it's unthinkable today.
Thank you. I'm going to thank all of our panelists and move us on to lunch. Thank our audience, too, for your great questions and attentiveness. So we'll reconvene here at 1 o'clock.
You guys both